Have you ever wondered why intelligent people make irrational decisions? Why some people crave attention, others seek power, and many quietly sabotage their own happiness without ever realizing it? The truth is, there are invisible forces driving human behavior. Forces most people never see, yet obey every single day. Beneath every argument, every ambition, every friendship, every betrayal, and every success, lies a hidden psychology shaping how we think, feel, and act. In the next few hours, you will discover the unspoken laws of human nature, the secrets behind influence, emotion, status, fear, and desire. Once you understand these laws, you will start seeing people differently. And perhaps, for the very first time, you will truly understand yourself. Chapter 1. The invisible forces behind human behavior. Let us begin with a question most people never ask. Why do you do what you do? Not the answer you give other people. Not the polished explanation you share at dinner or post online. The real answer. The one underneath everything. Most people believe they act based on logic. They believe they weigh their options, consider the consequences, and make reasonable choices. They believe they are in control of their decisions. But science, history, and everyday observation tell a different story. Human behavior is not primarily driven by logic. It is driven by forces operating beneath the surface of conscious awareness. Forces so deep and so constant that most people never question them. They simply obey them without knowing they are obeying anything at all. Think about a time you made a decision you later regretted. A relationship you stayed in too long. A job you did not leave when you knew you should. A conflict you escalated when you knew you should have stayed calm. An opportunity you passed on because something felt wrong, even though everything looked right on paper. In those moments, you were not following logic. You were following something older, deeper, and far more powerful. You were following your human nature. Human nature is the collection of instincts, emotional drives, social needs, survival programming, and psychological patterns that have been shaped by millions of years of evolution. These forces do not announce themselves. They do not explain their reasoning. They simply push. And most of the time, we follow. Here is what makes this fascinating. The same forces that drive a child to cry for attention drive an adult to check how many people like their post. The same instinct that made ancient humans stick close to their tribe makes modern people afraid to express opinions that differ from the group around them. The same survival fear that kept our ancestors cautious in unfamiliar environments keeps modern people stuck in jobs they hate, relationships that drain them, and lives that feel too small. The packaging has changed. The forces have not. Now here is the important question. If these forces are invisible, if they operate beneath our awareness, if we follow them without knowing, what can we do about it? The answer is understanding. You cannot fight what you cannot see. But once you see it, clearly and honestly, everything changes. You begin to understand why people around you behave the way they do. You begin to understand your own patterns. You gain the ability to respond rather than react, to choose rather than simply follow. That is what this audiobook is about. Not psychology for the sake of theory, not fascinating concepts that stay on the page, but real understanding that changes how you see the world, how you handle people, and how you live your life. There is a framework that connects everything we are about to explore. Think of it this way. Human behavior is driven by 3 layers. The first layer is survival, the oldest and most powerful. This includes the drive to avoid pain, seek safety, protect status, and secure resources. Much of what people do, even in modern environments, is still rooted here. The second layer is social programming. Humans are deeply social creatures. We evolved in groups. Our brains are wired to monitor social standing, seek acceptance, fear rejection, and compare ourselves to others constantly. This layer drives enormous amounts of human behavior. The third layer is the story we tell ourselves. Every person has a narrative about who they are, what they deserve, why things happen to them, and what the world owes them. This self-story is powerful. It shapes perception, filters information, and determines how we interpret everything that happens to us. Most of human behavior is the interaction between these 3 layers. And most of the confusion, conflict, and suffering in human relationships comes from people not understanding this. Here is a simple example. When someone becomes defensive in a conversation, most people assume that person is difficult or stubborn. But what is really happening? Their survival layer is reading the situation as a threat to their safety, status, or identity. Their social layer is detecting a risk of rejection or loss of standing. Their self-story is being challenged. They are not being difficult. They are being human. Understanding that does not mean you excuse everything. It means you can respond to what is actually happening rather than getting caught in surface behavior. This is the skill we are building throughout this audiobook. By the time you reach the final chapter, you will have a complete model for understanding people and yourself. Not a perfect model. Human beings are too complex for perfection, but a genuinely useful one that will serve you in relationships, in leadership, in decision-making, and in the quiet moments when you try to understand yourself honestly. Let us begin with the most uncomfortable truth about human nature. It starts with self-interest. Chapter 2. Why people are more self-interested than they admit. Most people will tell you they care about others, and they are not lying. The problem is, they are also not telling the whole truth. Human beings are wired for self-interest, not selfishness in the cruel sense, not a lack of compassion, but a deep, fundamental, biological orientation toward protecting and advancing the self. This is not a flaw in human character. It is a feature of human survival. The individuals who survived long enough to pass on their genes were the ones who prioritized their own well-being, their own safety, their own reproduction. Purely self-sacrificing creatures were eliminated by natural selection long ago. The result is that every person alive today carries this legacy. We are all, to varying degrees, motivated primarily by what benefits us. We hide it. We dress it up. We call it by more flattering names. But it is there. Here is the mistake most people make. They believe the people in their lives are thinking about them far more than they actually are. They believe their colleagues are genuinely rooting for their success. They believe their friends want what is best for them without condition. They believe their partners make decisions based on love alone rather than on a complex calculation of personal needs. This is not cynicism. It is clarity. The person who understands self-interest does not become bitter. They become better, because they stop being surprised by human behavior and start being prepared for it. Think about a common situation. You do something generous for someone. You give your time, your energy, your resources. You expect gratitude, perhaps a similar gesture in return. When it does not come, you feel hurt. You feel used. But here is what you did not account for. That person did not process your generosity in the way you imagined. They processed it through the filter of their own needs, their own situation, their own self-story. Your gift meant something to you because you sacrificed to give it to them. It may have fit neatly into the narrative that they are deserving of such treatment, or they may have already moved on to the next problem they need to solve. This is not cruelty. This is how human attention works. We are all the center of our own universe. We cannot help it. Our brain is literally located inside our own skull. Now here is the practical shift this creates. When you understand self-interest, you stop appealing to what you want and start appealing to what others need. This is one of the most powerful communication skills you can develop. Instead of asking someone to help you because you need help, you show them how helping you benefits them in some way. Not manipulatively, not dishonestly, but by genuinely understanding what they value and connecting your request to it. The best salespeople understand this. They do not talk about their product. They talk about your problem and how their product solves it. The best leaders understand this. They do not demand loyalty. They create conditions where loyalty makes sense for their people. The best partners in relationships understand this. They do not just express what they need. They also consider what their partner needs and work to meet that. There is also a more personal application of this principle. Understanding your own self-interest honestly is a form of deep self-awareness. Most people have desires, motivations, and intentions they have not examined clearly. They tell themselves they are doing something for noble reasons when the real motivation is more personal, more self-serving. And there is nothing wrong with that. You are allowed to have personal interests. The problem is when you do not admit them to yourself, because then you cannot make clean, honest decisions. A person who says they want to help others but secretly needs the validation that comes from being seen as helpful is not a bad person. They are a human person. But if they never acknowledge that need, they will keep making decisions that feed the need while telling themselves a different story. That leads to exhaustion, resentment, and confusion. Honest self-awareness about your own self-interest is not selfish. It is the beginning of genuine integrity. Here is the mental model to carry forward. Assume that every person, including yourself, is primarily operating from self-interest. Not always consciously, not always aggressively, but consistently. Then ask the question, what does this person actually need? And how does what I am asking connect to that need? This single shift will improve your communication, your negotiation, your leadership, and your relationships more than almost anything else. But self-interest alone does not explain everything. Because even when people know what is in their interest, they often do not pursue it rationally. That is because of something far more powerful than logic. Chapter 3. The hidden power of emotion over logic. Here is a scenario that should feel familiar. You have made a decision that made complete logical sense. You knew the facts. You understood the options. You could clearly see which choice was better. And yet, you made the opposite choice. Because it felt right. Or because the other option felt too uncomfortable. Or because a voice inside you said no even when your mind said yes. Logic told you to leave the relationship. Emotion kept you there. Logic told you to invest your money carefully. Emotion pushed you to spend it on something that made you feel good in the moment. Logic told you to stay calm during an argument. Emotion lit the fire before you could think clearly. This is not weakness. This is not stupidity. This is the way the human brain is built. Here is the basic picture. The brain has ancient emotional systems that have been operating for hundreds of millions of years. These systems are fast, automatic, and extraordinarily powerful. They were designed to keep you alive in dangerous environments where there was no time to think. See a threat, react. Feel hunger, seek food. Detect rejection, feel pain. The logical, reasoning part of your brain, the part that plans, considers consequences, and weighs options, is relatively new. And while it is capable of remarkable things, it is not in charge as often as you think. Neuroscience has shown something that was once considered controversial, but is now widely accepted. Emotions come first. Always. By the time your conscious mind recognizes a situation, your emotional brain has already assigned it a feeling, made a recommendation, and begun preparing a response. You experience the emotion before you experience the thought. And most of the time, you then use logic to justify the emotional conclusion you already reached. This is called post hoc rationalization. You decide emotionally. Then you explain rationally. Watch it in yourself. After you feel strongly about something, notice how your mind gathers evidence to support that feeling. Notice how you unconsciously downplay information that challenges it. Notice how you find reasons to do what you already wanted to do before you started thinking. Everyone does this. Not sometimes. Constantly. So what is the practical application? The first lesson is this. When you want to influence or communicate with someone, stop leading with logic. Logic does not persuade. Emotion persuades. Logic justifies. If you want someone to change their mind, you must first change how they feel. Then give them the logic that supports the new feeling. The person who makes an emotional connection before presenting an argument is far more persuasive than the person who walks in with facts and data alone. The facts do not land until the emotional door is open. This is not manipulation. It is understanding. And it works equally well in a business meeting, a difficult conversation with a family member, or a moment when you are trying to motivate yourself. The second lesson is about managing your own emotional states. If your emotions are shaping your decisions before you are even aware of them, then the quality of your decision-making is directly tied to the quality of your emotional state. A person who is anxious makes fearful decisions. A person who is angry makes aggressive decisions. A person who is insecure makes decisions based on the desire for validation rather than genuine wisdom. This is why self-regulation is one of the most valuable skills a human being can develop. Self-regulation does not mean suppressing emotion. That does not work. Suppressed emotions do not disappear. They go underground and make decisions from there instead. Real self-regulation means recognizing what you are feeling, understanding where it is coming from, and choosing whether to act on it right now or let it settle before responding. A useful practice is the pause. When you feel a strong emotion rising, especially in a high-stakes situation, deliberately pause before responding. Even 5 seconds, 10 seconds. The emotional surge peaks and begins to subside. Your reasoning brain comes back online. You can now respond rather than react. Simple. Difficult to do consistently. Transformative when practiced. The third lesson involves empathy. If emotions drive everyone's behavior, And if people's emotional states are often invisible beneath the surface, then the skill of reading emotional states, without being told about them directly, becomes incredibly valuable. People do not always say what they feel. Often they cannot. Often they do not know. But their behavior, their tone, their body language, and the specific things they react strongly to all carry information about their emotional state. The person who becomes quiet in a group setting is not uninterested. They may be afraid. The person who responds to feedback with sarcasm is not indifferent to your opinion. They are protecting themselves from vulnerability. The child who acts out is not simply misbehaving. They are communicating a need they do not have the words for. When you learn to read emotional states beneath surface behavior, you begin to see people more completely. You stop responding to their behavior and start responding to the person driving the behavior. That is the difference between a transactional relationship and a genuinely human one. Now here is something even deeper. There is one emotion that sits at the root of most human behavior. One need so powerful that its absence can drive people to do almost anything. It is the need to feel important. Chapter 4. The human need for importance and recognition. There is a story about a man who had everything by any external measure. A successful career, financial security, a family, social respect, and yet he could not sleep. He spent his evenings scrolling through his old achievements, reading old compliments, revisiting moments when he had been praised or recognized. Something inside him was never satisfied, never full. That story is not unusual. The need for significance, the need to feel that your life matters, that you are seen, that your presence makes a difference, is one of the most powerful forces in human psychology. Some researchers place it alongside food and shelter as a fundamental human requirement. Think about what people will sacrifice for this feeling. People will stay in relationships that hurt them because those relationships make them feel needed. They will take on work that exhausts them because it earns admiration. They will pick arguments they know are unnecessary because winning feels like proof they are smart. They will post carefully curated images of their lives online not because they want to share, but because they need to feel that others are paying attention. People will work for decades in careers that pay poorly but carry social prestige because the prestige feeds this need. They will double down on wrong opinions and arguments rather than admit they are wrong, because admitting error threatens their sense of importance. This drive is not petty. It is human. It emerges from the same social wiring that once made status a matter of survival. In ancient groups, people of low status had reduced access to resources, protection, and reproduction. The drive to seek status, to feel important, to be seen, it kept people alive. The mistake most people make with this principle is thinking it only applies to arrogant or insecure people. It applies to everyone. Even people who appear humble, even people who genuinely do not seek the spotlight, they still feel this need. They simply feed it in quieter ways. Through private achievement, through the approval of people they respect, through the story they tell themselves about who they are. So how do you use this understanding practically? The first application is in how you treat people. One of the most effective things you can do in any relationship is make the other person feel genuinely important. Not through flattery, not through empty compliments, but through sincere attention. Pay attention when someone speaks to you. Truly pay attention. Not while glancing at your phone. Not while forming your response. Listen with the full weight of your presence. This is rarer than you think. And people feel it immediately. Use people's names. Remember details they told you. Ask follow-up questions about things they mentioned weeks ago. These small behaviors signal one powerful message. You matter to me. You are not invisible. I see you. The effect of this on human relationships is extraordinary. People gravitate toward those who make them feel significant. They trust them more. They are more loyal to them. They are more open and honest with them. This is not a manipulation tactic. It is a form of respect, and it costs nothing. The second application is in how you handle conflict. Most arguments are not about the topic on the surface. They are about significance. They are about one person feeling dismissed, belittled, unheard, or disrespected. When you understand this, you stop arguing about the content and start addressing the underlying need. The next time an argument escalates, try saying something like this. I hear you. Your point matters. Before you challenge the position, acknowledge the person. Before you present your evidence, make the other person feel seen. This does not mean you surrender. It means you defuse the defensive wall before you try to walk through it. People who feel respected can hear challenges to their ideas. People who feel dismissed cannot. The third application is perhaps the most personal. If you understand that the need for importance is this powerful, you must also examine how it operates in you. Where does your need for recognition show up? Are you making decisions based on what genuinely matters to you? Or are you making decisions based on what earns you the most admiration from others? Are you choosing a path that feeds your authentic self, or a path that feeds the part of you that needs to be seen? The person who understands their own need for significance is no longer controlled by it. They can distinguish between genuine achievement and performed achievement, between doing something because it matters and doing something because of how it will look. That distinction will change the direction of your life. But even when people understand themselves, there is still another layer of reality that warps their perception in ways they rarely notice. Chapter 5. Why perception often matters more than reality. Two people attend the same meeting. They hear the same words. They observe the same body language. They receive the same information. One person leaves feeling confident that the project will succeed. The other leaves convinced it is about to fail. Same meeting. Opposite conclusions. This is not a puzzle. This is the normal operation of human perception. Reality does not reach you directly. It is filtered. Your brain takes raw sensory information and processes it through a complex system of prior experiences, beliefs, fears, assumptions, emotional states, and deeply held stories about how the world works. What comes out the other side is not reality. It is your version of reality, and it is the only version you have access to. This has enormous implications for how we understand people and ourselves. Here is a practical example. Imagine someone sends you a message and does not reply to your question. Depending on your internal state and prior experiences, you might interpret this as the person being busy, or as the person being rude, or as the person having a problem with you, or as the person being unreliable. The message is the same. Your interpretation changes everything. Now here is the deeper truth. You will not notice that you are interpreting. You will experience it as seeing clearly. This is what makes perception so powerful and so treacherous. Psychologists have identified a series of patterns called cognitive biases. These are systematic errors in human thinking. They are not random mistakes. They are predictable, consistent, and almost universal. Understanding the most important ones gives you a significant advantage in navigating human interactions. The first is confirmation bias. The tendency to notice, remember, and seek information that confirms what you already believe while unconsciously filtering out information that contradicts it. Once you have decided someone is trustworthy, you remember the times they came through and barely register the times they let you down. Once you have decided someone is a problem, everything they do confirms that belief. This is why first impressions matter so much. Not because they are accurate, but because they set the filter. The information that follows is largely processed through the lens of that initial impression. The second is the fundamental attribution error. When we explain our own behavior, we tend to cite circumstances. I was late because traffic was terrible. When we explain other people's behavior, we tend to cite character. He is always late because he is irresponsible. We give ourselves context. We give others fixed traits. This leads to enormous amounts of misunderstanding in relationships. The third is the negativity bias. Human brains process negative information more deeply than positive information. One criticism hits harder and lasts longer than 5 compliments. One bad experience in a relationship weighs heavier than many good ones. This was useful in survival environments where one missed threat could be fatal. In modern life, it creates a systematic distortion toward pessimism unless actively countered. So what is the practical tool here? It is this. Before you react to a situation, ask yourself, how might I be interpreting this incorrectly? Not as a way of dismissing your feelings. Your feelings are real data, but as a practice of checking your perception before acting on it. When someone says something that bothers you, pause and ask, what else could this mean? When you feel certain about a conclusion, ask, what information might I be filtering out? This is not about second-guessing yourself into paralysis. It is about building a habit of perceptual humility. The recognition that your version of events is not the only version, and often not the most complete one. There is also a leadership application here that is critically important. Effective leaders understand that their team members are operating from different perceptual realities. different backgrounds, different fears, different assumptions about what is happening and why. A manager who assumes everyone sees the situation the same way they do will consistently miscommunicate, mismanage, and miss opportunities to connect with their people. The most effective leaders are curious about other people's perceptions. They ask questions. They listen without rushing to correct. They understand that changing behavior requires first understanding the perception that is driving the behavior. Now here is something even more fascinating about human social reality. While perception shapes individual experience, there is a force that shapes entire groups. A pull so powerful that it bends not just behavior, but identity itself. Chapter 6. The need to belong and its influence on decisions. Imagine you are in a room of 10 people. A question is asked. 9 of them give the same answer. You know with certainty that the answer is wrong. What do? If you said you would correct them confidently, you may be right. But research suggests a large proportion of people would doubt their own perception before doubting the group. Some would change their answer to match the group, even when they knew the group was wrong. This is not weakness of character. This is the power of the belonging drive. Human beings are tribal creatures. For most of human history, belonging to a group was the difference between life and death. Exile from the tribe was effectively a death sentence. Isolation meant no protection, no resources, no reproduction. The individuals who survived were the ones whose brains responded to social exclusion as a genuine physical threat. Here is something remarkable. Neuroscience has found that social rejection activates the same neural pathways as physical pain. Being excluded literally hurts. And the threat of exclusion, even a subtle one, triggers the same defensive responses as physical danger. This is why people will change their beliefs, their appearance, their behavior, their values, and sometimes even their self-concept, to maintain belonging in a group. This is why peer pressure works far longer than adolescence. Why grown adults will not voice an opinion in a meeting if they sense the room has already decided. Why people stay in groups that harm them rather than face the identity crisis of leaving. The belonging need is also why social proof is one of the most powerful forces in human decision-making. When we are uncertain about what to do, we look at what other people are doing. Not because other people are necessarily right, but because their behavior signals what is socially accepted. And social acceptance keeps us safe in the tribal sense. This drives purchasing behavior, voting behavior, romantic choices, career choices, and lifestyle choices on a massive scale. The restaurant is popular, so it must be good. The book is a bestseller, so it must be worth reading. The crowd is moving in that direction, so that must be the way to go. Understanding this gives you 3 important abilities. The first is resistance to herd thinking. When you recognize the pull of the group, you can consciously check whether your inclination aligns with what you genuinely think or whether you are simply following to avoid the discomfort of standing out. This is not always easy. The pull is real, but awareness gives you a choice. The second is the ability to create belonging for others. People will follow, trust, and remain loyal to those who create a genuine sense of belonging. The leader who makes every team member feel included is not just being kind. They are meeting a fundamental psychological need. And people who have that need met do not look elsewhere. In relationships, this principle is equally powerful. One of the most painful experiences in human connection is being physically present with someone, but feeling emotionally alone. Belonging is not just about proximity. It is about the feeling that you are seen, accepted, and included as you actually are, not as you are expected to be. The third application is in understanding group behavior. Groups have personalities. They have norms, unspoken rules, and a collective identity. The behavior of individuals within groups often cannot be understood without understanding the group's identity and what that group implicitly requires of its members. When someone behaves in a way that seems inexplicable as an individual choice, ask, what group are they performing for? What identity are they protecting? What belonging are they maintaining? Most human behavior that seems confusing on the individual level becomes comprehensible at the group level. But here is the more complex question. If people are this driven to belong, to fit in, to be accepted, what happens to the parts of themselves that do not fit? They get hidden. Chapter 7. The motives people rarely reveal. People are not always dishonest, but they are almost never fully honest. This is not primarily about lying. Most people are not calculating deceivers. It is about the natural human tendency to present a version of yourself that earns approval, avoids judgment, and maintains relationships. And it is about the surprising fact that people often do not fully understand their own motives. There is a concept in psychology that explains this beautifully. It is the difference between the public self, the private self, and the unknown self. The public self is who you show the world. Carefully curated, socially calibrated, designed to earn the responses you want from others. The private self is who you are when no one is watching. Your quiet doubts, your real fears, your actual desires, your honest reactions to things you publicly pretend to feel differently about. The unknown self is the part you cannot see at all. The patterns in your behavior that only others can observe from the outside. The emotional roots of your reactions that you have never traced. The beliefs you act on without knowing you hold them. Most people only know their public self. Some people have partial access to their private self. Almost no one has clear access to their unknown self. That is the work of deep self-examination, therapy, honest feedback from people who know you well, and years of honest reflection. Now here is why this matters in relationships and in reading people. When someone says they are doing something for one reason, they are not necessarily lying. They may genuinely believe their stated reason, but there may be another layer beneath it. And that layer may be driving far more of the behavior than the stated reason. A person who gives unsolicited advice may say they are helping, but beneath that may be a need to feel superior, to be seen as knowledgeable, or to regain a sense of control in a situation where they feel powerless. A person who works excessive hours may say they are being productive, but beneath that may be a fear of stillness, a need to prove their worth, or avoidance of problems in their personal life that surface when they slow down. A person who becomes intensely critical of others may say they have high standards, but beneath that may be self-criticism so painful that it is easier to redirect it outward. None of this makes people bad. It makes them human. But when you can see beneath the stated motive to the actual driver, you gain enormous clarity about what is really happening in a situation. Here is the practical framework. Ask yourself 3 questions when you are trying to understand someone's behavior. First, what do they say they want? This is the stated need. Second, what do they actually receive from this behavior? Not what they say they receive. What the behavior actually delivers. This is often the real need being met. Third, what would they have to give up or face if this behavior changed? This is the hidden cost that keeps the pattern in place. This framework also applies to yourself. Because the motives you are least honest about with yourself are the ones most likely to drive your most important decisions without your awareness. Here is a practice. Identify one behavior in your life that you cannot fully explain. Something you keep doing even though you have told yourself you would stop. Something that does not make sense when you examine it rationally. Then ask the 3 questions. What am I saying I want? What am I actually getting from this? And what would I have to face if I stopped? The answers may be uncomfortable, but they are clarifying. And clarity, even uncomfortable clarity, is the beginning of genuine change. Speaking of things that are difficult to change, there is a force in human life that shapes behavior more consistently than almost anything else, including conscious intention. Chapter 8. How Habits Quietly Control Life. Here is a revealing question. How much of what you did today did you actually decide to do? Not how much did you complete. How much did you consciously choose? With full attention and deliberate intention? Research on human behavior suggests that somewhere between 40 and 50% of daily actions are habitual, not chosen in the moment, not the result of active deliberation. Simply the automatic execution of patterns that the brain has learned to perform without conscious input. You drove to a familiar destination on autopilot. You reached for your phone within seconds of waking up. You made a particular facial expression when someone interrupted you. You poured yourself something to drink at the usual time. You started a conversation with the same type of opener you always use. None of these required a decision. They happened because your brain recognized a familiar context and ran the established program. This is not a design flaw. It is an extraordinary feature of human cognition. Habits free up mental resources. Without habits, every simple action would require concentrated effort. You would be exhausted before noon. The brain automates what it can so that it can focus energy on what genuinely requires attention. The problem is that this automation is not selective. The brain does not distinguish between useful habits and harmful ones. It does not prefer patterns that serve your goals over patterns that undermine them. It simply automates whatever you repeat consistently, regardless of whether the outcome is beneficial. This is why understanding the habit loop is so important. Every habit runs on a three-part structure. There is a trigger, something in the environment or in your internal state that signals the habit to activate. A time of day, a location, an emotion, a particular person, a specific thought. There is the routine, the behavior itself, what you do when the trigger fires. There is the reward, the feeling or outcome that follows the behavior and reinforces the pattern. This is what the brain is actually seeking. The reward is the reason the habit was formed in the first place. To change a habit, the most effective approach is not to try to eliminate the behavior through willpower. Willpower is a limited resource. It depletes with use and fades under stress. Relying on willpower to change deeply embedded habits is like trying to hold back a river with your hands. The more effective approach is to keep the trigger and the reward, but replace the routine. You are essentially negotiating with your brain. You are saying, I understand you want a reward. I am not taking that away, but let us find a different path to it. The person who eats when stressed is not primarily seeking food. They are seeking relief from the feeling of stress. If they can find a different behavior that provides comparable relief, the brain can be gradually redirected toward the new routine. This is how lasting behavioral change actually works, not through a dramatic overhaul of willpower. Through understanding the structure of the habit and working with the brain's reward system rather than against it. There is also an environmental piece that most people underestimate. Your environment sends triggers constantly, and most of the time, you respond to them automatically. This means that redesigning your environment is one of the most powerful things you can do to change your behavior. If you want to read more, put the book where you can see it and put your phone in another room. The trigger changes. The behavior follows. If you want to eat more healthily, change what is visible in your kitchen. You do not have to rely on resisting temptation every time. Remove the trigger, and the automatic behavior does not fire. If you want to exercise consistently, make the first action require as little decision-making as possible. Sleep in your workout clothes if necessary. Put your shoes at the door. Remove the friction between the trigger and the behavior you want. Small environmental changes compound into large behavioral changes over time. But here is the deeper insight about habits as they relate to human nature. Your habits are not just behavioral patterns. They are identity statements. What you repeatedly do is what your brain eventually files under the category of who you are. The person who exercises regularly does not just have a habit of exercising. They are, in their own mind and in the minds of others, someone who exercises. This is why identity-based change is more durable than goal-based change. When you change a goal, you change a target. When you change your identity story, what you believe yourself to be, the behavior follows almost automatically. Instead of saying I am trying to stop being impulsive, try saying I am someone who responds thoughtfully. Instead of I am trying to save more money, try I am someone who is financially responsible. The brain filters information through identity. It accepts information that confirms what it believes about you and discards what does not fit. When you change the identity label, you change the filter, and the behavior changes to stay consistent with the new label. Now, speaking of the forces that shape behavior in dramatic ways, there is one that reveals the darkest and most surprising truths about human nature. Chapter 9. What power reveals about human nature? History offers an uncomfortable experiment that has been repeated thousands of times. Take an ordinary person. Give them significant power over others. Then wait. In a surprising number of cases, the person changes. Sometimes gradually. Sometimes quickly. Empathy decreases. Entitlement increases. Patience with those below them shrinks. Sensitivity to feedback fades. The capacity to see other people as fully human diminishes. This is not unique to historical tyrants or corrupt officials. Researchers have documented the same patterns in corporate managers, parents with absolute authority, teachers with unchecked influence, and even people in simple experiments where some participants are randomly assigned dominance over others. Power changes people, and the direction of change is often not the one they predicted. Why does this happen? The brain on power is neurologically different from the brain without it. People with power show reduced activity in the neural systems associated with empathy. They become less accurate at reading other people's emotions. They focus more on their own perspective and less on others. They begin to see people as instruments for achieving goals rather than as individuals with their own inner lives. This is partly because power reduces the need for social monitoring. When you are low status in any hierarchy, you must pay careful attention to the moods, preferences, and expectations of those above you. Your well-being depends on it. This attentiveness builds sophisticated social awareness. When you gain power, that dependence diminishes. You no longer need to read the room with such care. And without the practice, the skill atrophies. The powerful person gradually loses the sensitivity that they had when they needed it. There is also a psychological effect called the power-responsibility gap. People in power often feel responsible for outcomes, but not for the means by which those outcomes are achieved. They begin to justify behavior they would have condemned before. Because power provides a story, the ends are important enough to justify the cost. Now here is the critical practical application. If you lead others, this knowledge is a warning. The fact that power can erode empathy means that maintaining empathy requires conscious, deliberate effort. It means actively seeking honest feedback rather than surrounding yourself with people who tell you what you want to hear. It means remembering what it felt like to have less control, less certainty, less security. It means creating structures that keep you accountable even when no one requires it. The most effective leaders are those who hold power while consciously resisting the distortions it creates. They stay curious about the experience of those they lead. They treat feedback as valuable information rather than as a challenge to their authority. They remain genuinely interested in the human beings around them rather than just the performance of their roles. There is also an application for people navigating situations where they are not in power. Understanding the psychology of power explains why certain people behave in ways that seem unreasonable, cold, or dismissive. It is not always personal. It is often the effect of their position on their psychological state. This does not mean you accept mistreatment. It means you understand the mechanism, which helps you respond more strategically and less reactively. And here is the more universal truth. Power does not create character. It reveals it. The qualities that were already in a person, the empathy or the arrogance, the integrity or the shortcuts, the genuine care for others or the fundamental self-centeredness. Those qualities become more visible, more expressed, and more amplified when power removes the need to conceal them. This is a useful lens for evaluating people. You do not fully know someone's character from their behavior when they have something to prove or something to lose. You begin to see it clearly when they have nothing to gain from appearing a certain way. When the social pressure for performance relaxes. When they are alone with someone who cannot affect their status. How does someone treat a waiter who cannot help their career? How do they behave when they are exhausted and have dropped their social mask? How do they handle a situation where they can be unfair without consequence? That is where character lives. And speaking of resistance to seeing oneself clearly, there is one more force in human nature that operates as a kind of shield against personal growth. Chapter 10. Why people resist change. If you have ever tried to help someone who did not want to be helped, you understand this chapter already. Change is one of the most counterintuitive aspects of human nature. Because logically, if a pattern is causing pain, people should want to change it. If a belief is inaccurate, people should welcome correction. If a behavior is limiting, people should be eager for a better alternative. But that is not what happens. People defend their pain. They protect their inaccurate beliefs. They resist the alternatives. Not because they are irrational, but because of something deeply important about human psychology. Change threatens identity. Your beliefs, your habits, your worldview, your way of relating to others. All of these are not just behaviors. They are part of who you understand yourself to be. When someone challenges a strongly held belief, the brain does not process it as new information. It processes it as an attack on the self. And the response is the same as any attack: defensive posture, counterattack, or retreat. This is called identity protective cognition, and it is extraordinarily powerful. People will ignore evidence, attack messengers, and hold on to demonstrably false beliefs if those beliefs are woven into who they are. Think about what it would actually mean for someone to change a core belief or deeply embedded pattern. It would require admitting that what they have been doing was wrong, that the version of themselves they have been presenting and experiencing was inaccurate, that they are responsible for consequences they may have been attributing elsewhere. That is not a small thing. That requires a kind of psychological courage that few people are called to regularly and that many find genuinely threatening. There is also a comfort factor in familiar pain. What is known, even when it hurts, is predictable, and the brain values predictability above many other things. The person who grew up in a chaotic household may unconsciously recreate chaos as an adult because chaos feels normal. The person who has always been treated as secondary in relationships may gravitate toward people who repeat that pattern because familiarity registers as comfort at the deeper levels of the brain, even when the conscious mind knows better. So how do you actually change? And how do you help others change? The first insight is that telling people they need to change rarely produces change. It produces defensiveness. The more forcefully you push, the more firmly the resistance is activated. This is called psychological reactance. People need to feel that their autonomy is intact. The moment they feel they are being told what to do, they resist, even when the suggested change would benefit them. The more effective approach is questions rather than commands. Ask someone what they want their life to look like, not what they should change, what they want. Let them articulate the gap between where they are and where they want to be. When people discover the need for change themselves, they are not fighting against an external push. They are following an internal pull. This is the basic principle behind motivational interviewing and many of the most effective approaches to behavior change. Meet people where they are. Explore what they want. Let the gap between their current state and their desired state create the motivation. Then help them see practical paths forward. For your own change, the key is separating behavior from identity. You are not your habits. You are not your patterns. You are not even your beliefs, in the sense that beliefs can update when new evidence appears. The things in you that need changing are behaviors and patterns. They are not you. They are things you do. And things you do can change without you losing your essential self. This reframe makes change less threatening. Because you are not destroying yourself. You are updating yourself, not replacing who you are. Simply revising what you do and think and choose. And here is the final piece on resistance to change. Even understanding all of this, change still requires time, repetition, and compassion for the process. You will not see the patterns clearly the first time. You will slip into old behaviors again and again before the new ones take hold. This is not failure. This is the learning process. The person who changes is not the person who never slips. The person who changes is the person who notices the slip, understands what happened, and returns to the new direction. Again and again, until the new pattern is strong enough to run on its own. But there is one aspect of human nature that makes this harder than anything else we have discussed so far. It is the part of the self that most people are afraid to look at directly. Chapter 11. Understanding the shadow side of human behavior. Carl Jung, one of the most influential psychologists of the 20th century, proposed a concept that remains one of the most useful frameworks for understanding human nature ever developed. He called it the shadow. The shadow is not the dramatic villain within. It is simply the collection of qualities, impulses, and characteristics that a person has rejected, suppressed, or denied over their lifetime. Usually because those qualities were judged as unacceptable by parents, by culture, by community, or by the person themselves. The shadow is not evil. It contains envy, aggression, sexuality, selfishness, ambition, cruelty, weakness, the full range of qualities that humans are taught they should not have. But because these qualities are suppressed rather than eliminated, they do not disappear. They go underground, and they express themselves in indirect, often disguised, and frequently destructive ways. Here is how the shadow shows up in daily life. The person who insists they never feel angry will periodically explode with disproportionate rage in situations that only slightly provoke them. Because unexpressed anger does not dissolve. It accumulates, and it finds release eventually, often at the wrong time and at the wrong person. The person who prides themselves on being perfectly selfless will eventually feel a burning resentment toward those they help. Because the needs they deny in themselves do not stop existing. They just wait. The person who judges others harshly and frequently is often projecting their shadow. The qualities they attack most ferociously in others are frequently the qualities they have most vigorously rejected in themselves. The person who is furious about dishonesty may be struggling with their own relationship to truth. The person who condemns vanity may be deeply invested in their own image. The person who despises weakness may be running from their own fear of being seen as inadequate. This is not absolute. People can genuinely dislike qualities they do not possess. But when the reaction is disproportionate, when the judgment is intense and recurring, when the topic creates a particular heat in someone, that is often a shadow signal worth examining. Understanding the shadow has several powerful practical applications. The first is in self-awareness. When you find yourself reacting with unusual intensity to someone else's behavior, take that as an invitation to look inward. Ask, what in this person's behavior am I most bothered by? Do I recognize that quality anywhere in myself, however small or disguised? What happens if I honestly examine whether that is true? This is not about self-flagellation. It is about gathering information. Information that can lead to integration. The process of acknowledging the suppressed parts of yourself, not to act on them freely, but to stop being controlled by them unconsciously. The second application is in relationships. Two people in a relationship will inevitably trigger each other's shadows. The things you find most infuriating about your partner are sometimes the things you have most suppressed in yourself. This does not mean the behavior is acceptable, but it adds a layer of information to the conflict that can lead to genuine understanding rather than endless surface-level arguments. The third application is in understanding extreme human behavior. History's most destructive people were not exceptional in their evil. Many of them were ordinary people with unexamined shadows. People whose suppressed qualities, their powerlessness, their shame, their fear, were redirected outward and amplified through ideology, authority, or mob psychology. Understanding this does not excuse atrocity. It does explain its human origin, and that is the beginning of preventing it. At the individual level, the shadow that is never examined will be acted out in some form. The only question is whether it will be expressed consciously, with self-awareness and some degree of choice, or unconsciously, in ways the person cannot control and may not even recognize. Examining your shadow is not comfortable work, but it is some of the most important work a human being can do. Because the things you refuse to see in yourself will control you. The things you look at honestly lose their power to drive you from the shadows. Now we have traveled through the major invisible forces of human nature. Survival instincts, self-interest, emotional programming, the need for significance, the distortions of perception, the pull of belonging, hidden motives, the automaticity of habits, the corruptions of power, resistance to change, and the influence of the shadow. Now comes the most important chapter of all. How do you take all of this and actually use it to live better? Chapter 12. How to use human nature wisely in everyday life. Understanding human nature is only valuable if it produces better outcomes in real life. So in this chapter, we get practical. We take everything we have explored and turn it into specific, usable skills for communication, relationships, influence, and self-management. There are 5 domains where this understanding applies most directly. Let us go through each one. The first domain is communication. Most communication problems are not problems of information. They are problems of connection. People are not failing to exchange data clearly. They are failing to create the conditions where the other person is actually open to receiving what is being said. When you understand human nature, you know that people are always listening through the filter of their emotional state, their self-interest, their identity, and their need for significance. This means effective communication requires you to address those filters before the content lands. Before you try to persuade someone, make them feel heard. Before you correct someone, make them feel respected. Before you challenge someone, make them feel safe. This is not soft or sentimental. It is strategic. It is the most direct path from your words to genuine impact. The most powerful communication habit you can build is genuine listening. Not waiting to speak. Listening. Reflecting back what you hear. Asking questions that show you have engaged with what was said. People who feel truly heard become open in a way that almost no other approach achieves. There is also the principle of leading with curiosity rather than judgment. When someone says something you disagree with, your instinct may be to immediately correct or counter. But that triggers defensiveness. The alternative is a simple question. Help me understand your thinking on that. Or, that is interesting. What led you to that conclusion? You are not pretending to agree. You are staying in connection while you gather more information. And often, The other person will work through their own thinking and arrive at a more nuanced position on their own, without any direct opposition from you. The second domain is relationships. Healthy relationships are not built on the idea that the other person will meet all of your needs. They are built on the clear understanding of what both people actually need, honest communication about those needs, and a genuine commitment to meeting enough of them that both people feel valued. The most common relationship problem is unspoken expectations. People enter relationships, friendships, and partnerships with an unexamined set of assumptions about how the other person should behave. When those assumptions are not met, they feel disappointed or betrayed, even though the other person never agreed to meet those expectations and may not even know they exist. The solution is radical honesty, delivered with care. Saying what you need instead of hoping the other person figures it out. Asking what the other person needs instead of assuming you know. Creating explicit agreements rather than relying on implicit ones. Understanding the shadow is also important in close relationships. The people you love most will inevitably trigger your most sensitive spots. That is not a problem with the relationship. That is the nature of intimacy. The question is whether you use those moments as opportunities for self-examination and genuine growth, or whether you use them to build resentment. The third domain is leadership and influence. Leadership is the art of directing human energy toward a shared purpose. And because humans are driven by the forces we have explored throughout this audiobook, effective leadership requires understanding those forces deeply. The leader who understands self-interest creates incentives that align personal goals with group goals. People will work hard for what benefits them. Make the mission meaningful to their individual journey, and you unlock genuine engagement rather than mere compliance. The leader who understands the need for significance makes every person feel valued and seen, not through hollow praise, but through genuine attention, specific recognition, and the consistent message that each person's contribution matters. The leader who understands belonging creates a culture where people feel safe to speak honestly, to fail without catastrophic consequence, and to challenge ideas without challenging their standing in the group. And the leader who understands the shadow does the work to examine their own blind spots rather than projecting them onto the people around them. Influence, more broadly, is not manipulation. Influence is the ability to move people toward outcomes that are genuinely good for them and for the shared situation, using an understanding of human psychology rather than fighting against it. The most ethical and effective influencers lead with value. They give before they ask. They make their requests clear and honest. They appeal to genuine needs rather than manufacturing false ones. They respect the other person's autonomy and make it easy to say no. The fourth domain is decision-making. Better decisions come from understanding the ways your own psychology distorts your thinking. Create deliberate space between stimulus and response, between the trigger and the action. This applies to financial decisions, relationship decisions, professional decisions, and any high-stakes choice. When you feel a strong urge to act immediately, treat that urgency as a signal to pause rather than as a signal to accelerate. Actively seek information that contradicts your current view. This counters confirmation bias. It is uncomfortable. It is also the only way to ensure you are making decisions based on an accurate picture of reality rather than a comfortable one. Separate the decision from the emotion of the moment. Make major decisions when you are in a neutral state rather than in the grip of excitement or fear. The choice that looks obvious when you are thrilled or terrified often looks very different when you are calm. And make a habit of asking, what would I advise a friend in this situation? Research has repeatedly shown that people give better advice to others than they give to themselves, because they are less emotionally entangled with the other person's situation. Using this perspective on your own decisions can dramatically improve the quality of your thinking. The fifth domain is self-management. Everything in this audiobook ultimately serves one purpose at the personal level, helping you understand yourself clearly enough to direct your own life intentionally rather than simply being carried along by the forces that operate in you. Self-management begins with honest observation. Watch your patterns without judgment. Notice your recurring emotional reactions, your automatic behaviors, your predictable responses to specific types of situations. You are not criticizing yourself. You are building a map. Once you have a map, you can navigate. You can anticipate your own tendencies and prepare for them. You can create systems and environments that work with your psychology rather than requiring you to fight it every day. You can develop the habits that serve your goals, manage the emotional states that distort your judgment, and examine the beliefs that limit your possibilities. Self-management also requires regular periods of stillness. The constant noise and stimulation of modern life makes it almost impossible to hear your own inner experience clearly. The voices of others, the demands of social media, the pressure of perpetual productivity, they drown out the quieter but more essential signals about what you actually need, what you genuinely value, and who you truly are beneath the performance. Silence and solitude are not luxuries. They are necessities for anyone who wants to understand themselves with any depth. Now we have arrived at the final chapter. Everything we have explored comes together in one complete model. Chapter 13. The complete framework for understanding yourself and others. You have come a long way through this audiobook. You have looked at the invisible forces behind human behavior, the drive towards self-interest, the dominance of emotion over logic, the deep need for significance, the distorting power of perception, the tribal pull of belonging, the hidden motives beneath stated reasons, the quiet authority of habit, the corruptions of power, the protective resistance to change, the shadow side of the self, and the practical applications of all of it. Now let us bring it all together into one complete picture. Here is the framework for understanding human nature. Every person you encounter, including yourself, is simultaneously operating on 4 levels. Level 1 is the survival level. At this level, the human organism is constantly scanning for threats: physical danger, social exclusion, status loss, resource scarcity, loss of predictability. When something triggers the survival system, it overrides almost everything else. Logic goes offline. Empathy contracts. Behavior becomes defensive or aggressive. The person is operating from their most ancient programming. Understanding level 1 helps you recognize when a person has been triggered at a survival level, and it helps you stop trying to engage their rational mind until the emotional system has calmed. You cannot reason someone out of a triggered survival state. You must first create safety, reduce threat, restore calm. Then reason becomes available. Level 2 is the social level. This is where the need for belonging, significance, approval, and status operates. At this level, people are constantly, often unconsciously, monitoring their standing in every social situation. They are asking, am I respected here? Do I belong? Am I seen? Am I significant? Understanding level 2 helps you see the social subtext beneath almost every human interaction. The person who interrupts constantly may be afraid of not being heard. The person who always deflects praise may have learned that visibility is dangerous. The person who constantly UPS others is feeding a significance need that is not being met elsewhere. When you address level 2 needs, when you make someone feel seen, respected, and significant, you unlock a quality of trust and connection that purely transactional communication never reaches. Level 3 is the identity level. This is the level of self-story. The narrative that each person has constructed about who they are, what they are capable of, why things happen to them, and what they deserve. This story operates constantly, filtering perception and shaping behavior. Understanding level 3 helps you recognize why people react so strongly to challenges to their beliefs, why they defend obviously flawed positions, and why change is so psychologically costly even when it is clearly beneficial. Challenges to the self-story are experienced as existential threats. Working with someone's self-story rather than attacking it is the most direct path to genuine influence. Level 4 is the conscious level. This is where deliberate thinking, goal setting, reasoning, and intentional choice operate. This is the level most people assume is running the show. It is valuable and powerful, but it sits on top of the other 3 levels and is shaped by all of them. Real understanding of human behavior requires seeing across all 4 levels simultaneously. Not just what someone says consciously, but what their survival system is signaling, what their social needs are driving, and what their self-story is filtering. Now here is how this framework applies in practice. When you are in conflict with someone, ask, which level is this conflict actually happening at? If it is a survival trigger, the first task is safety. If it is a social need, the first task is acknowledgement. If it is an identity challenge, the first task is respect for the person before addressing the position. If it is a genuine conscious disagreement at level 4, then, and only then, is direct reasoning the right tool. When you are trying to understand your own behavior, run the same analysis. Which level is active right now? What is my survival system responding to? What social need is present? What story am I telling myself about this situation? And then, separate from all of that, what do I actually think, want, and choose? That separation between the automatic forces and the conscious self is the practice of self-awareness. And it is a practice in the truest sense. You will not perfect it, but you can improve it continuously. Here are the 10 most important insights from this audiobook, brought together for the final time. 1. People are primarily motivated by self-interest, including yourself. Understanding this is not cynical. It is clarifying. Use it to communicate with the other person's needs in mind, not just your own. 2. Emotions drive behavior more than logic. Connect emotionally before you communicate rationally. Manage your own emotional states as a primary skill rather than an afterthought. 3. Every person needs to feel significant. The greatest gift you can offer anyone is genuine attention and sincere respect. This costs nothing and creates extraordinary connection. 4. Your perception is not reality. It is your version of reality, shaped by prior experience, fear, assumption, and bias. Stay curious about what you might be missing. 5. The need to belong shapes behavior at every level of human life. Creating genuine belonging in families, teams, friendships, and communities is one of the highest forms of leadership. 6. People rarely reveal their true motives, often because they do not know them themselves. Look beyond stated reasons to what a behavior actually delivers to the person performing it. 7. Habits run most of life on autopilot. Redesign your environment and your identity story before you rely on willpower. Change at the habit level is more durable than change at the motivation level. 8. Power reveals character and often distorts it. Hold power while actively working against its distorting effects. Seek honest feedback. Stay genuinely curious about the experience of those around you. 9. Resistance to change is almost always resistance to identity disruption, not resistance to the change itself. Help people change by helping them see that the change is consistent with who they are or who they want to become. 10. The shadow, the parts of yourself you have denied or suppressed, will express itself one way or another. Examine it with honesty and courage rather than letting it drive from the darkness. And here is the thread that connects all 10. Human beings are not primarily rational creatures who occasionally feel emotions. We are emotional, social, survival-oriented creatures who also have the capacity for reason. That capacity is remarkable and irreplaceable, but it only functions well when it is used in partnership with genuine self-awareness and emotional intelligence. The person who understands human nature does not become manipulative. They become more compassionate. Because when you understand why people behave the way they do, the fears driving the anger, the wounds driving the walls, the needs driving the performances, you stop judging the behavior and start seeing the person. And when you understand why you behave the way you do, you stop being your own mystery. You become someone you can genuinely know, work with, improve, and respect. This is not a destination. There is no point at which you have fully understood human nature, including your own. People are not problems to be solved. They are dynamic, evolving, endlessly complex beings. The goal is not completion. The goal is an ongoing orientation of curiosity, honesty, and genuine interest. Be curious about people, not to analyze or categorize them, but to understand them. Most human beings are doing the best they can with the equipment they have and the maps they were given. That does not make all behavior acceptable, but it makes it comprehensible. And comprehension is the beginning of wisdom. Be curious about yourself, not with the critical eye of someone building a case against themselves, but with the honest gaze of someone genuinely interested in living well. What do you actually need? What do you actually believe? What actually drives you beneath the story you tell yourself and others? These questions do not have fixed answers, but asking them consistently keeps you close to what is real. And be patient with others and with yourself. Understanding human nature does not mean that human behavior suddenly becomes simple or easy to navigate. It means you have better tools. You will still misread situations. You will still be surprised by people. You will still be surprised by yourself. But gradually, over time, with practice, the picture becomes clearer. You begin to see what was always there, but previously invisible. You see the fear behind the aggression, the loneliness behind the performance, the longing behind the demand, the love behind the wall. You begin to understand that most of what divides human beings from one another is not fundamental incompatibility. It is the collision of invisible forces that neither party can see. And when those forces become visible, even partially, something shifts. Conflict becomes comprehensible. Disconnection becomes reparable. Confusion becomes clarity. That is the gift of understanding human nature. Not power over others. Power over the forces that have quietly been running your life and the lives of everyone around you without anyone's permission or awareness. You started this audiobook with a question. Why do people do what they do? Now you have the beginning of an answer. Not a complete one. No audiobook can give you that. But a genuine one. A useful one. One that will deepen and sharpen as you carry it into your life and let it interact with everything you observe and experience. Go back into the world differently. Watch people with curiosity rather than judgment. Watch yourself with honesty rather than criticism. Notice the invisible forces at work in every room you walk into, every conversation you have, every decision you face. And remember this above all. The most important thing you can understand in this lifetime is yourself. Not as a project to fix, not as a problem to solve, but as a human being to know, fully, honestly, and with genuine compassion. That understanding is the foundation of everything, and it begins the moment you decide to look.